A very good morning and welcome. If you've just joined us, we're in Fourways today and we're talking tax issues. We had the medium-term budget policy statement delivered on the 21st of October by Finance Minister Nhlanhla, and we're unpacking it and what it might mean for you, what the implications are. Certainly we're in the midst of tough times, and it's going to mean belt tightening by all of us, and all of us paying our taxes to try and help boost the revenue to deliver all of those services that we desperately need. Now, we've spoken and heard from some of our panelists, but one guy that we haven't heard from, and I'm hopefully going to hear from him now, is Clive Ramatibela-Smith, a business analyst. So Clive, your thoughts, you've had a week to think about this budget statement. Your thoughts, how has business reacted?
No, well, thanks very much, Paige. I think it's been very, very difficult. What the minister's been able to do is like pull the rabbit out of a hat. In actual fact, it's like a magic wand that you required to actually be able to execute this particular midterm budget. But some big surprises, I must say. One of the things that obviously bothered business is the fact that the growth prospect has already been downgraded. So we look at that and we get worried because when you look at the South African population growth on an annual basis, you're looking at about a number of 1.5%, and that's the rate at which we are growing. And so we're worried that when this population keeps growing, how is our economy going to be balanced? So it's as if we are at a stalemate, and that's probably what business is concerned about. And obviously we're having this challenge with unemployment. So you start asking yourself, where is it going to end? How do we make sure that these things are put in place and we create more jobs? We know that the state is the biggest employer in the country. How do we turn that around? How do we get business involved to start actually creating jobs? And I think sometimes we're very quick in actual facts to look at the budget and say, what is the government going to do about the budget? We don't always say, well, what is business going to do about creating jobs? And there's a lot of incentives for business to be able to create jobs. There's also available grants for interns that government tries to put in place to actually inspire and put them back and get them to get jobs. But we don't see business taking that up at all.
Why do you think that is? Why is business not doing its bit?
I think it's because sometimes business plans 10 to 15 years. And what happens is that we forget about the actual country, and the reality is that if you look at, for example, what the JSE is doing currently versus what the real economy is doing, Economics 101 tells you that the bows should actually reflect what's happening in the economy. But in this particular, there's an absolute contrast between the two. We've hit 53,000 points and this year already on the JSE, but the economy is not growing at the same pace. So it means business is stale at creating jobs. And so we need to ask, why is it that business is not creating these jobs that are required, even though there's been attempts to actually influence them? So that's a very big concern for us, from my perspective, about South African business, with the fact that there's 700 billion rands available at SARB for them. That's been already exposed last week. So we are asking ourselves, what do we have to do to inspire business further to actually implement some of these things that are available, that is made possible by government?
All right, Minister, I'm not an economist, but I believe that a low debt to GDP ratio indicates that an economy is producing and selling goods and services sufficient to pay back debts without incurring further debt. We've shifted from 26% to 47%. So are we at a stage where we need to phone a debt counsellor?
Indeed, you are correct, Peter. A sustainable debt level is critical in maintaining a stable economy. In 2014, when we tabled our medium-term budget policy statement, we made it clear that we are going to be implementing some level of fiscal discipline in order to create that space that you are talking about, because over the years, since the onset of the economic meltdown in 2008-9, we've accumulated large amounts of debt is we implemented our countercyclical fiscal policy. Countercyclicality means that you allow debt to grow during the times because you also do not want to hold debt back to the detriment of the economy itself growing. So as we did that, the debt that we accumulated between that time and now is the one where we say, if we go beyond this, we are going to reach unsustainable levels. It's for that reason that we now have said, in addition to that discipline that we implemented in putting together our fiscal package that looked at reducing debt, which means through reducing expenditure, but also enhancing revenue. But all of those have happened to a very limited extent because of poor economic growth coming from both domestically and internationally. What we have then said, we're now introducing another fiscal guideline which begins to now link or align our growth in expenditure to our long-term economic growth or GDP growth. So it's maintaining that stability. That's how you stabilize it. So despite the volatility and the movement in the business cycle, you actually need to now link that up over the 3 years, such that it follows. It must track that movement in GDP growth. Okay. That's the only discipline you can put and stabilize it at below 50%, and that is what we have committed to. Keeping a ceiling also is one of the things that we've been steadfast on, and I think in that regard, we've actually been able to hold the fort.
All right. Okay. In a short while, I'm going to ask you about the ratings agencies and what they're thinking. But let's go to table 11, where we'll find Ram Naidu.
Good morning, Minister and your team. Now that the rand has reached almost its lowest, what is the government doing to encourage small businesses in developing an export market for this country? We do believe that it's a big avenue that we should be looking at to bring back our money into this country.
Indeed, small business development is government's area of focus. We have allocated adequate resources in order for that. First, the department that is newly established to focus on developing policy that promotes small business, but we did not stop there. We also continued to put in place incentives that would, that are targeted and dedicated towards small business. I want to also believe that small business is not something that can only be incentivized and that we can promote through putting in place mechanisms and policies. It is something that we also should instill a sense and a spirit of entrepreneurship amongst our people, because small business by its very nature is able to rise out of very little and meager resources in the space, and then for government and all other structures to meet small business halfway in their developmental phase. And I think that is what we should promote in the country, that whilst we have issues with unemployment, which is growing, that the bulk of our unemployed people continue to look for opportunities that would actually put them in a self-sustainable position, and then to take advantage of government's initiatives and government incentives that the Department of Small Business Development is promoting and is getting into the space. But big business also has a responsibility of pulling up in a number of ways small business, and it is in the interest of the rest of the business environment for small business to flourish, because you get your supplies closer to where the businesses are operating. We've seen that with large operators and large retail industries, that are operating in the rural areas, and it's for that reason that a particular focus in agriculture, particularly as one of those growth areas in small business development, that when big business does business with small business gets an opportunity to participate in the mainstream economy.
Okay, one thing that came through the recent ANC NGC was the idea of a wealth tax. Now, I'm not sure how much you can share with us, and I'm going to try and get 3 different responses from you around this. And I'm going to start with you, Commissioner. It's always been my impression that it's not a huge number of people in South Africa that are already contributing to your tax revenue. And I'm just wondering if you could just give us an idea who is paying the tax and what percentage of the population does that represent? Because if we start talking about wealth tax, it seems to me that those that are already paying are going to have to pay more.
Well, let me go back to what the Minister has said on the small business first. We want to indicate that SARS has what is called a small business desk in our offices, with a view to help the small businesses also to grow and understand what the implications are for them as to get into the economic space. Now, with respect to the wealth tax, this speaks to what we call the high net worth individuals. Wealth tax is a very tricky area to deal with. But I need to respond to the issue as to how many taxpayers we have in the country. We have in excess about 18 million, and out of that, around 7 or 8 million are the ones who are paying the major part of the taxes that we have in the country. So you would like to draw as much efficiencies as possible in that space. And therefore, it's going to be a balancing act that needs to be looked into. But be as it may, the biggest contributor into our revenue, it's PIT, and then you have CIT, and then you have VAT and other components. Okay. So that's the breakdown.
What's PIT and CIT?
Personal income tax,
right,
and company income tax.
Thank you.
Those are the 2 components, the bigger ones, yes.
All right, so I'm going to save you to last. Clive, is that going to scare people? You know, entrepreneurs like to come and live in South Africa and register as taxpayers. Will they go live somewhere else?
I don't think so. I think that if you were to implement it, my only concern is that I would not want to see the rainmakers, the guys that make the economy vibrant, that make it work, being taxed more. I think that would create a little bit of an uncomfortable situation, knowing that I'm creating jobs, I'm doing my utmost to assist in terms of the issues that the country is facing, and then I get taxed even more. The idea is a European one, I think, firstly, and it works well there because, I mean, they are wealthy. South Africa is a very unique country. We have to look at the dynamics and the people that live here and how different business is done in South Africa compared to the rest of the world. And so in saying that, we cannot tax people even heavily, specifically because they're rainmakers. They are the guys that run the engine of the South African business. What I would say, though, that can be done, which is also a practical example that can be done, if you were to implement tax on luxury goods, that would be more effective because that's something for those with a sweet tooth, you know. So those are the guys that if you were to do that, that would be a better mechanism than actually taxing the wealthy. So from my perspective, tax the people that can afford to buy the most expensive things on the expensive things, not on their personal account.
All right, Minister.
Well, as a country, we have a very progressive tax system, and I think the other part of it lies in the redistributive nature of our, fiscal framework in general. You collect the taxes, and it is in the manner that you distribute those taxes among the citizens that also goes a long way in addressing. We've seen our social wage growing. It is as a result of our progressive tax system that taxes that exempts the ones that cannot, and that taxes the middle to higher income is slightly higher. But I think what is missing in the debate, and it would be interesting because that's what we have said, is that I have also requested the judge to proceed, the Davis Tax Committee, to proceed with looking into the wealth tax as one of those. But some of the taxes that we have actually can be classified as wealth tax. Well, the estate duty is one of those, because wealth tax actually taxes accumulated wealth. Because your flows, your income, it cannot be classified as wealth. And as the Commissioner said, the personal income tax is the largest a tax type that we receive in our revenues. But we've also got capital gains tax. But we have seen also how our change in the dividend, in the taxing of dividends has actually paid off, where, we had a situation where just one taxpayer was able to give us a windfall of in excess of close to 6 billion rands. I'm talking one taxpayer here. But that's what wealth tax is at the end of the day. But it's a subject worth getting into, but we actually approach all tax policy matters in a responsible manner where we throw it out there, debate it until we have, there won't be, full consensus, but we want a fuller understanding of society out there. And as people will always say about taxes, no one wants to pay tax. And that is why those that love Mr. Moyana here love him with a passion of hatred. Because we all want to die, as they would put it, but no, we all want to go to heaven, but none of us wants to die.
Okay. All right, let's go to table number 6, where we'll find Sichaba Sapiri.
Good morning, Mr. President. My name is Sichaba Sapiri from Fumani Holdings, and my question is, how does Treasury ensure that various government departments meet their targets in terms of procuring from youth-owned businesses? Thank you.
Thank you, Sichaba. National Treasury, working with the relevant departments, and in this space, the Department of Trade and Industry, have issued a practice note. The practice note is an instrument that actually directs departments to allocate part of it. The difficulty with the actual execution of that is that as government departments, we will only receive reports when we review the implementation of policy rather than being able to be there on a regular basis. And it is for that reason that we appeal to companies besides and state departments also, besides the fact that there is legislation, the fact that there is regulations, but we appeal also to their consciences to actually, and that's why the partnership between government and the private sector becomes critical, because we need to have one common objective. We need to share the view of dealing with the issues that result in the lack of trust that we have, because we want to bridge this divide. We want to deal with this divide, and it is in the interest of the private sector to work with us in making sure that we deal with issues of inequality, access to opportunities, and making sure that if we address that, it will work for the benefit, and it will mutually benefit both the private sector, government, and society in general.
Okay, Lerato Mashinini is on table number 14. Lerato Mashinini.
Thank you, Peter. Minister, there's a general sentiment within the market that in 12 to 18 months, the sovereign faces a credit rating downgrade. What is it that the state is doing to mitigate these risks?
Thank you. The country is currently in the process of implementing its National Development Plan. The plan calls on all of us to play a role in our respective areas of work, or areas or stations in life. Since 1955, this is the only instrument that has brought South Africans together. It is also the only instrument that assigns a particular responsibility to every individual in the country, be it even if you're in the private sector, civil society, a public servant, government, as the state, you are in the state-owned entity. It is for that reason that I think we just need that renewed focus in making sure that we all rally behind implementing our National Development Plan. Excuse me. It is for that reason that we have hived out some of those key elements of the National Development Plan. If you look at the 9-point plan that the President presented in the State of the Nation address, it spoke to the key areas of the National Development Plan that begin to reduce it to implementable chunks of the plan. But we go beyond that. It is now an integral part of our medium-term strategic framework. So at each department on the government side now is in the process of implementing the plan. And if we deal with the structural reforms that have been identified in the NDP that talk to the issues of dealing with the constraint of energy, and as Chose was speaking here, we're making progress in that space. If you look at us being able to stay within the target band of our debt levels as we have put out there, indeed we're staying the course. Restraining excess expenditure, making sure that we improve our revenue collection, as the Commissioner was saying. All of those are the things that any rating agency would look at. But it's not only for ratings agencies, it is for the sustainability of our own fiscal framework in order to be able to meet our needs. Okay. Of course, it is important that we protect ourselves from a further downgrade, which would create a situation where we pay more for our debt than we otherwise would have been. So whilst this is not our primary objective of protecting ourselves from rating agencies, but it is because we want to protect the resources such that those resources are able to fund the needs of the country.
Okay. One question I do want to raise, and maybe this is preempting the tax reforms that your Davis Commission is looking at already. Commissioner, the VAT system, the way it's set up at the moment, particularly for small businesses, and these are the ones that we're hoping are going to create jobs, the VAT is based on the supply time of when you give out an invoice to your customer. And so it becomes due at that particular, but your customers, particularly government, sometimes take an age to pay back. So you don't have cash in the bank, and yet Mr. Moyane is coming and saying, Peter, you owe me VAT. There's this disconnect, and for a small business, that can actually be mean going out of business. Is this something that you're looking at?
Well, there's a policy in government that all government departments must pay small businesses within 30 days, and that's it's non-negotiable. But I think for us it also has an impact, because if we are not paying the small businesses on time, it has major consequences in terms of their cash flow. So from a SARS perspective, we want to have as much VAT coming through. But at the same time, if government and other entities are not paying the small businesses on time, it has a constraint in terms of revenue collected. So we are saying, we echo the same sentiments, although policies is from the ministry, that compliance with the stated decision of government of paying within 30 days is a matter that has to be stuck to.
Clive, businesses, they're suffering with this VAT system at the moment, and they're saying, look, this guy's not paying me, and it might not be government, it's another debtor. Should we change the VAT system?
I think we have a very effective VAT system that works well. There are ways of making sure that you do get paid. I've never had a problem with government paying. I think because sometimes business goes in without proper planning, and it's very difficult, obviously, for an entrepreneur to plan appropriately, to plan according to what they have in the budget, what they have in the bank, and to be able to make sure that when that time comes, they're able to get paid. But if, for example, I'm listed as a retailer on most of the platforms that I do business for, and I know the turnaround times, you have to plan in line with those turnaround times, because you have already established a relationship with those particular parties, both business and government. So you know how to actually manage appropriately your resources as they come and
that's
as they
government, but just debtors in general. There's a disconnect between, and I'm not sure if I'm getting my point across. Maybe, Minister, you can help me. I owe SARS VAT as soon as I generate my invoice. And within 2 months, whatever it is, I need to account for that sale. Yeah. But the receipt against that sale is coming much, much later. So I'm ending up paying SARS quicker than I'm getting paid by the debtor, and that can put me out of business.
I think the same can be said also for the opposite of that, because we do have, some of the, VAT registered vendors who actually take long to pay over to SARS. And I think it is finding the right balance between the two. And I think the system is well geared to be able to process the refunds timelessly. And it is a target that from time to time, as we engage with SARS, it's well spelled out that VAT refunds have to be done expeditiously. But if there are issues, and I think all the taxpayers now have recourse. We have the tax ombud who is waiting. As I always say to the commissioner, he's surrounded by 4 judges. He's got the tax ombud as a judge. He's got the Judge Davis, who's it's actually 3. He's got Judge Davis, who's handling the tax review, but he's also got Judge Kroon is in the advisory board.
Okay.
So all of those judges are meant to bring about justice in that space, and I think taxpayers must have confidence in us looking out for their interests.
All right, okay, we're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, Donald Matabule is here. He's going to ask his question and also take a look at some of your tweets as well, so stay with us.